They carried pistols in their skirts, rode horses faster than most men, and walked into saloons where danger lingered in every glass of whiskey. In the Wild West, women were not only mothers and wives, they were outlaws, gunslingers, gamblers, and pioneers who faced violence, hunger, and scandal at every turn. Some became legends, like Calamity Jane or Belle Starr. Others were forgotten, their graves unmarked in dusty plains. But all lived lives far more dangerous than the myths of Hollywood suggest. Imagine standing in a lawless frontier town, hearing the piano play in a saloon, while a woman in a feathered hat hides a derringer in her bodice. To survive the West was not to live quietly, was to fight, to scheme, and to gamble with fate itself. And for women, every step could mean freedom or a bullet. But before we step deeper into these stories, where are you listening from tonight? Is it late at night, when the world around you is quiet, or in the morning, as you start your day? Drop your answer in the comments, and subscribe to Whispers of History to join thousands who uncover the secrets of the past. Now, close your eyes and imagine the dust of the frontier rising, the smell of gunpowder in the air, the creak of wagon wheels echoing across the plains. You are no longer a spectator. You are standing in the Wild West itself, walking in the footsteps of women who defied rules, risked death, and wrote their own legends in blood and dust. One of the most famous was Calamity Jane, born Martha Jane Cannery. She dressed like a man, swore like a soldier, and rode like a cavalry scout. Imagine her in Deadwood, South Dakota, staggering drunkenly into a saloon, pistol strapped to her waist, her reputation larger than life. She worked as a nurse, a gambler, a storyteller, and a fighter, never bound by society's expectations. Yet behind the rough exterior lay tragedy, poverty, illness, and heartbreak that haunted her until the end. Jane's life was both freedom and pain, a reminder that women who lived like men in the West paid a terrible price. But her legend endured because she dared to live in a world that told her she could not. Then there was Belle Starr, the bandit queen, who rode with outlaws and became one herself. Accused of harboring Jesse James and known for her ties to criminals, Belle embodied the dark glamour of the West. Imagine her riding through the Arkansas frontier, long skirts whipping in the wind, a pistol tucked into her sash. She was both feared and admired, using her wit and beauty as weapons as sharp as her guns. But like so many in the West, her story ended violently shot in the back on a lonely road, her murderer never caught. Her death became a legend, proof that in the frontier, danger followed women just as it did men, and survival was always uncertain. Belle's life was dangerous, seductive, and tragic, exactly the kind of tale the West thrived upon. Not all women carried guns, many carried burdens just as heavy. Pioneer women who traveled westward in wagons faced dangers as harsh as any outlaw. Imagine crossing endless prairies, storms of dust and lightning, rivers that could drown you, and raids that could kill you. These women endured hunger, disease, and childbirth in wagons rattling across landscapes that offered no mercy. Their diaries reveal the cost of survival, burying children by the trail, sewing dresses from flour sacks, praying for safety with every mile. They may not have been armed bandits, but their lives were battles nonetheless. In many ways, their quiet endurance was braver than any duel at high noon. Yet history rarely names them, their sacrifices buried beneath the myths of gunslingers. And in the towns, women found other ways to survive, often in saloons and brothels, where danger was constant. Saloon girls danced for coins, poured whiskey, and tried to keep smiling while fights broke out around them. Brothel workers were both desired and despised, their lives risky, their deaths often violent. Imagine the flicker of gas lamps, the smoke curling in the air, as a woman leaned against a bar, smiling at a miner with gold dust on his boots, never knowing if he'd be lover, enemy, or killer. For many women, sex work was the only way to eat, yet it left them vulnerable to violence, disease, and scorn. These women lived lives every bit as dangerous as the outlaws and often died just as young. The Wild West was never a land of safety, was a place where survival was earned through grit, cunning, and risk. For women, every role, outlaw, pioneer, wife, or saloon girl, was dangerous in its own way. Their stories are carved into history, not in marble, but in dust, gunfire, and whispered legend. And as we move deeper into this world, we'll uncover more tales of sharpshooters who challenged men, of women who ruled gambling halls, and of wives who hid pistols under their aprons. The Wild West was wildest for its women. The next step takes us into the lives of those who became deadlier than the guns they carried. Are you ready to meet them? If Calamity Jane and Belle Starr lived in shadows of danger, Annie Oakley stood in the spotlight. Known as Little Sure Shot, she was no outlaw but a performer, turning deadly skill with a rifle into fame that spanned continents. Imagine a young woman in a buckskin dress, raising her rifle with calm precision, firing shots that split playing cards in half, mid-air. Crowds gasped, cowboys stared in awe, and even European royalty came to witness her. But behind the fame lay the same peril every Western woman faced: mockery, rivalry, and constant threats to her reputation. Annie fought not with pistols in dusty alleys, but with the sharp edge of respectability. She defied every stereotype, proving a woman could outshoot men without sacrificing grace. Yet she also revealed a darker truth. For women in the West, fame was as dangerous as obscurity. One misstep, one scandal, and even legends could fall. While Annie Oakley dazzled crowds, other sharpshooters turned their skills into survival on the frontier itself. Imagine a woman defending her cabin against raiding bandits, steadying her rifle as the night filled with hoofbeats and shouts. Some women became local legends, their names barely remembered outside their towns, but their courage carved into frontier lore. These were women who carried rifles as often as babies, whose skill meant the difference between life and death. Their lives reveal that in the West, survival was not about gender, but grit. Yet danger lurked in every corner: outlaws, disease, and the unforgiving land itself. Their bravery kept families alive, but their stories rarely reached the pages of history books, overshadowed by the myth of men with smoking guns. In truth, many of the West's deadliest offenders were women, unseen yet unforgettable. But not all women fought with weapons. Some fought with cards, dice, and wit. Gambling halls of the Wild West were places of fortune and ruin, and a few bold women ruled them like queens. Take Poker Alice, who became infamous as a gambler across Deadwood and other frontier towns. Dressed elegantly, with a cigar in hand, she dealt cards with a calm that unnerved her opponents. Imagine the smoke-filled room, the clink of coins, the hush as she laid down a winning hand, outsmarting men who underestimated her. Poker Alice lived by her own rules, gambling, running saloons, even carrying a pistol when needed. Yet her life, like so many, was marked by tragedy, with husbands lost and constant brushes with violence. The gambling table offered fortune, but it also brought enemies, and Alice lived every day knowing a single bullet could end her reign. Meanwhile, saloon girls and entertainers continued to walk the line between glamour and danger. They were the heart of Western nightlife, drawing miners, cowboys, and outlaws into smoky taverns with their laughter and songs. But their smiles often hid fear. Violence could erupt in an instant: a drunkard drawing his gun, a gambler accusing them of betrayal. Imagine dancing on creaking floorboards, hearing a fight break out, bullets flying as you try to duck behind the bar. For these women, every night was a gamble, not only with cards but with life itself. Some became legends, known for charm and resilience. Others disappeared, their names forgotten in shallow graves outside mining camps. Their danger was constant, their survival a miracle. For many, the saloon was both stage and battlefield. At the same time, frontier justice weighed heavily on women who dared to step outside society's expectations. Female outlaws were hunted just as relentlessly as men, but their trials drew more outrage, for they were seen as doubly scandalous criminals and women who had abandoned virtue. Belle Starr, for example, was branded the bandit queen. But in court, she was condemned not only for her crimes, but for her defiance of gender roles. Imagine standing before a judge, your crimes no greater than a man's, yet your punishment harsher because of your sex. For women in the Wild West, justice was rarely fair, it was vengeance cloaked in law. Their danger was not only from bullets and knives, but from a society determined to make examples of them. Their trials became performances, their lives consumed by judgment long before their deaths. And so, the women of the Wild West lived lives every bit as thrilling and as perilous as their male counterparts. Sharpshooters dazzled crowds, gamblers ruled tables, saloon girls danced on the edge of death, and outlaws rode into legend. But beneath the stories of fame and scandal lay a harsher reality. Survival was never guaranteed. The next chapter of this story reveals an even darker truth, how women endured not only bullets and betrayal, but the merciless hardships of frontier life itself, starvation, disease, and the endless battle against the land. For in the Wild West, nature was as deadly as any outlaw. Are you ready to step deeper into the struggle that shaped the lives of women on the edge of civilization? Beyond the saloons and gambling halls, the Wild West tested women with a different kind of danger. The land itself, the frontier, was vast, unforgiving, and merciless to those who crossed it. Pioneer women who left the comfort of eastern homes found themselves in wagons rattling across endless plains, deserts, and mountains. Imagine the dust choking your lungs, the wagon wheels breaking under scorching sun, the prairie winds cutting through thin canvas. For these women, survival was a daily war. They cooked over open fires in storms, washed clothes in rivers thick with mud, and gave birth on wagons without doctors or midwives. Many buried children along the trail, marking graves with stones before pushing forward. Their courage was rarely celebrated, yet it was greater than most gunslingers. They did not fight with pistols, but with endurance, holding families together as the wilderness tried to tear them apart. Diaries of pioneer women reveal a world harsher than any dime novel. Some describe nights when wolves circled camps, their howls echoing through the dark. Others tell of rivers that swallowed wagons, drowning children before parents could save them. Imagine the heartbreak of watching your child carried away by a current, while your only choice was to keep moving westward. Illness too was a constant shadow. Cholera, dysentery, and fever swept through wagon trains, leaving women to nurse the sick while knowing death was often inevitable. Yet amid the grief, they pressed forward, planting seeds of new communities on the edge of civilization. These women may not have fired guns in duels, but their bravery was unmatched, their sacrifices endless. History may forget their names, but without them, the West could never have been one. Frontier towns offered little relief. Even after the journey, women faced shortages of food, water, and safety. Many homes were crude cabins, built from sod or rough timber, barely protecting families from bitter winters. Imagine trying to keep children warm as snow seeped through walls, or boiling scraps of cornmeal into thin gruel to quiet hunger. In these towns, women were often the first teachers, healers, and midwives, balancing endless labor with fragile hope. Their work was invisible compared to gunfighters, yet without it, communities would have collapsed. And still, danger crept into every home. Outlaws raided settlements, native wars flared, and drunken fights in nearby saloons spilled blood into the streets. For women, there was no refuge. Even domestic life, so often idealized, was fraught with peril. Their homes were battlegrounds against nature, hunger, and violence. Childbirth itself was among the greatest dangers. With few doctors and little medicine, every pregnancy carried the risk of death. Women gave birth in wagons, cabins, or tents, often without clean tools or experienced midwives. Imagine the fear of labor pains in the middle of nowhere, wolves howling outside, your husband miles away hunting food. Many women died, leaving infants to be raised by older siblings or neighbors. Others endured repeated losses, their grief written in journals that historians later uncovered. Yet these women faced childbirth again and again, because survival of families and communities depended on it. In their quiet suffering lay a strength equal to any outlaw's courage. The Wild West was not won by bullets alone, it was carried forward by mothers who risked their lives with every child they bore. And then there were the women who lived between worlds, Native American women caught in the storm of westward expansion. Some married settlers, forming fragile bonds across cultures, while others were torn from their people through conflict and capture. Imagine a young woman forced into a settler's household, balancing survival with resistance, her identity caught between two warring worlds. For many, love itself became dangerous. Alliances formed in fragile peace, often collapsed in violence. Others, like Sacagawea, guided explorers and became legends, but their lives were far from safe. Disease, displacement, and betrayal followed them, their endurance tested at every turn. Native women carried stories of resilience, often erased from history but essential to understanding the West. Their lives revealed that danger was not only about bullets and brawls, it was also about survival in a world reshaped by conquest. The West demanded everything from women: strength, sacrifice, and unyielding will. Whether crossing plains, building towns, or giving birth in the wilderness, they faced a constant battle against forces beyond their control. Imagine standing at the edge of the frontier, the horizon endless, your body weary, your spirit torn between fear and determination. For many women, there was no choice but to endure. Yet in their endurance, they carved the foundations of the modern West. Their stories may lack the glamour of saloon queens or bandit queens, but their bravery was the truest of all. And as we move forward, we will step into another layer of danger: the women who turned their hardships into rebellion. Those who became outlaws, not by choice, but by necessity. Their guns, like their stories, still echo across the West. Are you ready to meet them? Not every woman of the West endured danger quietly. Some embraced it, taking up guns and riding with outlaws, carving names into legend with bullets and blood. The most infamous was Belle Starr, already known as the Bandit Queen. She was accused of sheltering Jesse James and riding with gangs, but her reputation was far larger than her actual crimes. Still, she embodied the allure of a woman who refused to bow to the law. Imagine her riding through the Arkansas frontier, her long skirts whipping in the wind, a pistol in her sash, her presence commanding both fear and fascination. Belle lived dangerously, balancing charm and ruthlessness, admired by some, despised by others. Yet her fate mirrored the West itself, violent, sudden, and unsolved. Shot in the back on a lonely road, her killer never caught, Belle's story became a legend of betrayal, proof that in the West, danger always struck closest to home. Belle was not alone. Women like Pearl Hart stepped into outlawry when desperation left no other choice. In 1899, Pearl and an accomplice robbed a stagecoach in Arizona Territory, the last recorded stagecoach robbery of the Wild West. Imagine the shock of passengers as a young woman in men's clothes, armed with a revolver, demanded their valuables. Newspapers sensationalized her as both villain and victim, some painting her as a desperate woman abandoned by her husband, others as a reckless criminal chasing fame. When she was finally caught, the crowd at her trial treated her like a spectacle, her gender as shocking as her crime. Pearl's story reveals a haunting truth. Women who dared to step into outlaw roles were never judged like men. They were ridiculed, scandalized, and punished for daring to live outside their gender's cage. Survival made them criminals, and their lives became theater for a society eager to condemn. Then there was Laura Bullion, part of Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch gang. Known as the Rose of the Wild Bunch, she rode with some of the most notorious outlaws of her time, helping forge checks, plan robberies, and evade the law. Imagine her dressed in men's clothing, hair tucked under a hat, riding fast across the plains with stolen money tucked away. To lawmen, she was a dangerous accomplice. To her gang, she was family. But when the Wild Bunch fell apart, Laura's glamour disappeared, replaced by prison walls. She spent years behind bars before fading into obscurity, living the rest of her life in anonymity. Her story reminds us that outlawry rarely ended in glory. Most women who chose it did so briefly, desperately, and at the cost of peace. Yet for a time, they lived freer than society allowed, defying every rule, no matter the price. But not all female outlaws carried guns. Some wielded cunning, turning crime into survival through scams, theft, and manipulation. Women in mining towns often ran con games, tricking men who underestimated them. Imagine a saloon crowded with miners, a woman smiling sweetly as she dealt cards, her partner in the shadows ready to cheat the game. These women risked beatings, lynchings, or worse if caught, yet they played their games boldly, using wit as their weapon. Others acted as spies for gangs, passing messages, smuggling supplies, and distracting sheriffs at crucial moments. Their roles were rarely remembered in dime novels, but without them, many outlaw gangs could not have survived. For these women, crime was not glory, it was necessity. The West offered few choices, and many discovered that the fastest way to survive was also the most dangerous. Female outlaws fascinated the public because they shattered the myth of womanhood. Newspapers called them monsters, temptresses, or unnatural, twisting their stories into morality plays. But beneath the sensationalism were real women, often poor, often abandoned, sometimes abused, who found power in the only way the frontier allowed, through defiance. Imagine standing trial, the courtroom packed with gawkers, your name turned into scandalous headlines across the country. Men might be admired for outlawry, but women were torn apart, their femininity questioned, their morality condemned. Yet that very outrage kept their names alive, making them legends long after their deaths. The danger of the outlaw life was not only the bullet or the noose, it was the crushing weight of society as scorn, branding them forever as symbols of rebellion. The stories of Belle Starr, Pearl Hart, and Laura Bullion reveal that for some women, danger was not simply endured, was embraced. Their choices led them into violence, scandal, and legend. But their lives remind us that the Wild West was not only shaped by sheriffs and gunfighters, but by women who refused to play by the rules. And yet, for every outlaw queen, there were dozens of women who faced danger in quieter, but no less deadly forms. In brothels, saloons, and the streets of mining camps, where violence could erupt at any moment. In the next part, we step into that hidden world, the lives of women who sold pleasure, carried shame, and often paid the highest price in the Wild West. Are you ready to hear their dangerous truths? Brothel workers faced even greater risks than saloon girls. The Wild West brimmed with red light districts, where women offered companionship in dimly lit rooms along dusty back streets. Some madams grew rich, running brothels with strict rules and heavy guards, but most women endured lives of exhaustion, illness, and constant danger. Imagine the creak of stairs at midnight, the flicker of lantern light, the heavy boots of a stranger who might bring gold or violence. In mining camps and cattle towns, women were seen as commodities, bought for an hour and discarded. Yet, behind closed doors, they wielded quiet power, holding secrets whispered by outlaws, sheriffs, and politicians. That knowledge could mean survival, or it could make them targets. For many, the brothel was not a place of luxury, but a battlefield where every night was a fight to live until morning. Disease haunted these women as much as bullets. Without modern medicine, infections spread quickly through brothels, cutting lives short. Newspapers of the time often mocked them, branding them fallen women, while conveniently ignoring how deeply towns relied on their trade. Imagine lying fevered in a small cot, listening to laughter and music drifting through thin walls, while death crept closer with every breath. Some brothel women took opium or whiskey to dull their pain, addictions that only tightened their chains. Yet, in the face of this, resilience emerged. Women looked out for one another, pooling money to bury the dead, sheltering each other from violent men, and forming bonds as strong as family. Their survival was not just physical, it was an act of defiance against a world that sought to break them. Yet, even within this harsh reality, legends were born. Take Madame Moustache, a gambler and brothel owner in California, whose sharp wit and business sense earned her respect. Or Eleanor Dumont, known as Madame Moustache, who ran successful gambling halls and brothels across the frontier. Imagine her sitting at a table, cigarette smoke curling around her, her eyes watching every move of the men who thought they could outwit her. She lived by her own rules, fearless in a world that scorned her profession. But even she could not escape the West's dangers. Ruin and despair eventually drove her to suicide. These stories remind us that even powerful women of the trade were never safe, their success always shadowed by tragedy. In the West, fortune and ruin were never more than a heartbeat apart. The public judged these women harshly, branding them as immoral while flocking to their doors. Towns condemned brothels in daylight, then tolerated them at night, knowing they fueled the economy. Imagine the hypocrisy. Lawmakers who railed against vice in speeches, then slipped quietly into brothels after sundown. For women, this double standard was suffocating. They were both desired and despised, needed and rejected. Even when they tried to leave the trade, society rarely forgave them. Many ended up trapped in a cycle of poverty, scorn, and violence. Their danger was not only from the men who visited them, but from the society that used them while denying them dignity. To live as a brothel worker in the Wild West was to exist in a constant state of peril, where your body, reputation, and life were always at risk. Still, some women turned the very system that oppressed them into power. Wealthy madames built empires, owning saloons, gambling houses, and even entire city blocks. Julia Boulette of Virginia City became famous for her beauty, generosity, and influence, even mingling with high society. But her fame drew envy and hatred. In 1867, she was found murdered in her home, her body left brutalized. Imagine the shock of a town that had adored her, suddenly reminded that no amount of wealth or popularity could shield a woman from violence in the West. Her murder became legend, another tale whispered in saloons about how even the powerful could fall. For every Julia Boulette who rose, countless unnamed women fell silently, their stories lost to the dust. The lives of saloon girls and brothel workers remind us that the West's dangers were not only found in duels and robberies, they were woven into every night of work, every client, every glass of whiskey poured. These women carried both allure and risk in equal measure, shaping the culture of frontier towns while paying the steepest price. As we move forward, we will step into yet another world of danger. Women caught in the crossfire of Western justice, accused of crimes they did not commit, punished not for what they did, but for what they represented. Are you ready to face the gallows with them? When the law came knocking, women of the Wild West often found themselves judged more harshly than men. Outlaws who were men could sometimes win fame, even admiration. But women who broke the law, simply lived outside society's rules, were branded with shame. Imagine standing in a crowded courtroom, whispers rippling through the crowd as eyes fix on you. Not for your crime alone, but for the audacity of being a woman who defied expectations. For many, guilt or innocence didn't matter. Their trials were public theater, where reputations were shredded and punishments were harsh. A man might be fined or jailed. A woman, for the same crime, could be ostracized, whipped, or condemned to the gallows. The law was rarely blind. In the West it was fueled by prejudice, and women carried the burden of being judged both as criminals and as fallen women. Consider the case of Pearl Hart, whose 1899 stagecoach robbery shocked Arizona territory. Newspapers did not just cover her crime, they obsessed over her gender. She wore men's clothes, carried a revolver, and spoke boldly in court, daring to defy the image of proper womanhood. Reporters painted her as both villain and spectacle, describing her appearance in scandalous detail. Imagine the press gallery filled with eager writers, their pencils scratching furiously as Pearl smirked at her accusers. Though her robbery netted little money, her trial became national news. She was imprisoned but treated as a curiosity, her gender turning her crime into a sensation. Pearl's story revealed a brutal truth. Women who faced the law were judged not only by what they did, but by how they looked, dressed, and behaved. For them, justice was not about facts, it was about spectacle. Other women were punished for crimes that barely warranted attention. In frontier towns, a drunken brawl might end with a man paying a fine, but if a woman was involved even as a victim, she risked jail time. Imagine a saloon girl accused of theft because a drunken miner misplaced his coins, or a pioneer wife dragged into court for defending herself with a kitchen knife against abuse. The law in many towns was arbitrary, shaped by sheriffs, judges, and juries who valued appearances over truth. Women who fell into the system often had no way out. Prisons were filthy, designed for men, and held women in appalling conditions. Their reputations were ruined, even if freed, their names forever stained. Danger in the West was not only in the streets, it was inside the very halls of justice. And then there were the gallows. Few women were hanged in the Wild West, but those who were became infamous. Cattle Kate, whose real name was Ella Watson, was accused of cattle rustling in Wyoming. In truth, she had married a ranch hand and legally received cattle as part of her dowry. But powerful ranchers, threatened by her independence, accused her of theft. Without trial, she and her husband were lynched by vigilantes in 1889, her name forever branded as Cattle Kate. Imagine the horror-bound hands, a rope around her neck, a mob shouting in the name of justice. Her death showed how fragile women's lives were in the West. Power, prejudice, and lies could condemn them faster than any courtroom. Ella's story was less about law and more about fear of a woman claiming freedom in a man's world. Women in jails and prisons endured hardships far worse than men. Cells were small, filthy, and unsafe, often shared with violent criminals. Guards offered little protections, sometimes even worse dangers. Imagine lying on a hard wooden plank at night, rats skittering across the floor, the stench of human waste filling the air. Disease thrived in these places, claiming lives quickly. Women who survived incarceration rarely found peace afterward. They were shunned, unable to marry, work, or reclaim respectability. Some drifted into poverty, forced back into saloons or brothels simply to survive. For them, prison was not just punishment, it was a life sentence, even after release. Their danger did not end at the gates. It followed them, marking them forever as outcasts in communities that thrived on gossip and condemnation. The law claimed to bring order to the West, but for women, it was often another weapon used against them. Trials turned into theater, punishments into warnings, and prisons into places of despair. Some women fought back, others accepted their fate, and still more were silenced forever. Yet their stories remind us that justice in the Wild West was rarely about fairness, it was about power, image, and fear. And as brutal as the law could be, there was another enemy women faced daily, one more merciless than any judge or jury: the land itself. In the next part, we step back into the unforgiving grip of the wilderness, where storms, droughts, and isolation tested women's courage to its breaking point. Are you ready to face nature's wrath with them? The greatest outlaw in the Wild West was not a man with a revolver, it was nature itself. For women, the wilderness was a relentless enemy. Blizzards swept across the plains, burying cabins under snow. Droughts cracked the earth, leaving families without food or water. Prairie fires raced faster than horses, devouring everything in their path. Imagine standing with a bucket of water, skirts heavy with ash, your children screaming as flames closed in. These disasters struck without warning, leaving women to fight or perish. They learned to read the skies, to store every crumb, to nurse the sick through storms that howled like demons. In their struggle, they became warriors, not of guns, but of grit. Their courage carved survival out of a land that wanted them gone. Danger in the West did not only wear a gun belt, it came with thunder, fire, and famine. Isolation was its own kind of danger. Many women lived miles from neighbors, their only company the wind across the prairies. Imagine nights so quiet that every creak of the cabin made your heart race. Every distant howl of coyotes reminding you how alone you were. Loneliness broke some women as surely as bullets. Diaries tell of wives who slipped into despair, their minds unraveling under endless silence. Others found strength in solitude, teaching themselves to hunt, farm, and heal without help. But even the strongest felt the weight of emptiness. A knock on the door could mean salvation, or a stranger with violent intent. For frontier women, every sound in the night was a gamble, every day a test of endurance. They lived in a balance between resilience and madness, knowing that survival meant mastering both the land and their own fear. Yet even in the harshest wilderness, women built communities. Churches, schools, and sewing circles became lifelines, places where women shared stories, comfort, and strength. Imagine a small log cabin filled with flickering lamplights. Women gathered to quilt while sharing whispered advice on childbirth, crops, and survival. These gatherings were more than social, they were strategies for endurance. Through solidarity, women turned isolation into resilience. They buried one another's dead, raised each other's children, and taught skills that meant the difference between life and starvation. These small acts of community were as heroic as any gunfight. Their quiet bravery shaping towns that would one day grow into cities. Yet danger never disappeared, lingered outside every door, waiting in storms, violence, and hunger. The myth of the Wild West often shows men with guns, sheriffs, and outlaws dueling at dawn. But the truth is far more complex. Women bore dangers daily, often without recognition. They faced bullets in saloons, starvation in cabins, betrayal in courtrooms, and despair in the wilderness. Imagine carrying a pistol in your apron while baking bread, knowing that at any moment you might need to defend your children, or standing at a graveside, burying a husband lost to violence or disease, then shouldering the burden of survival alone. Their danger was constant, their courage unending. Without them, the West would never have been settled. Their sacrifices are buried under myths, but their stories remain, waiting for us to listen. And so we return to the question, what was it truly like to be a woman in the Wild West? It was to live on the edge of danger every moment, to gamble with life in a saloon, to risk death in childbirth, to fight storms and outlaws with equal courage. It was to be judged harshly by society, yet admired in secret, to be desired, condemned, forgotten, and remembered all at once. Women of the frontier were gunslingers, gamblers, mothers, healers, and rebels. They were both victims and survivors, crafting lives in a land that offered no mercy. Their danger was not only their struggle, it was also their power. For in surviving, they became legends as enduring as the West itself. Close your eyes now and imagine the sound of wind rushing across the plains, the crackle of fire in a saloon, the cries of children in a wagon train. Imagine the courage it took to wake each day knowing danger waited at every turn. That was the reality of women in the Wild West, lives lived in constant peril, but also in fierce resilience. Their legacy is not one of fragility, but of survival, written in dust, blood, and memory. And though the guns of the West have fallen silent, their whispers remain. If you listen closely, you can still hear them, voices of women who face danger with unshakable will, shaping a frontier that could never truly tame them.